So we have to cut this hole back a little bit. Welcome back to just another car show. So now that everything is out of the interior and we've kind of started cleaning it up, now it's time to just make it dirty again by doing all the stuff we need to do. The whole goal with the interior and the whole goal with the car in general is to make it a really good daily driver. And that's kind of how I looked upon doing every single thing I wanted to do to the interior. I wanted to make sure it was modern enough that I would like to drive it around and have it as daily, but also I wanted it to just not be too hard. I didn't want to have to rip the whole thing apart. I just wanted to make it work. There's a few things needed to get wired in this car. The big things are the turn signal switch, the new gauges I wanted to put in. I needed to put in a kill switch. I needed to put in a headlight switch for the halos, and I needed to get the radio all wired up. I decided instead of just doing everything piece by piece by piece, I decided to just take all the wiring I needed to do and do it in like one big day. Last time you saw me, we were taking out this, which is the old turn signal controller and whatever you want to call switch. We have all new parts, so what we're going to do is, first thing, is we're going to wire this connector up to our new turn signal stalk, and that way it plugs directly in the car and we don't have to do any fancy stuff. So we're going to get this in there and make it look all pretty, and then yeah, we have a few more wiring things to do before we put it back in the car, but at least we'll get this done right now on the bench before we do anything else. The turn signal switch already had a bunch of pre-terminated lines on it for like the horn and for the turn signals, a bunch of other stuff. The problem was they didn't fit through the actual stalk of the steering column, so I basically had to rewire it. What I ended up doing is I ended up cutting the actual wires for the turn signal switch in half and then splicing them through and then rewiring them in the middle so that they connected up to the old connector that they had. That's a finished turn signal harness. So before we put this back in the car, we are going to wire up a couple other little things we need to do. AKA, I want to put this dash in right here. Once I had that thing wired up, it was now to jump onto the gauges. The gauges is an oil pressure gauge, a water temperature gauge, and a voltage gauge. It's technically 3 gauges, but instead of running everything and a bunch of wires running into it, I really didn't want it to look like a rat's nest just behind it, because a lot of them you'll see have wires hanging down and they're hanging low. I wanted to make it as nice as possible. So basically I ran everything into 1 gauge and then jumped across from there to power and ground everything else. And it looks pretty clean. I ended up taking it and it looks like these got these little loops in it. There's no power wires that's showing any like terminals out, so it can't like short out anyway. Even if something touches up against it, it's still not going to short out. I tried to make just everything as clean as possible when I was doing my wiring. The last 2 things I had to wire up were switches. One switch was just a normal on and off switch. That switch was to shut off my ignition coil. A lot of people call this a kill switch, and I really needed a kill switch because this car's locks aren't great, and they're old cars, you know. Someone can get into it pretty easily. They're not like, it's no secret that old cars are not hard to get into, and especially they're not hard to hotwire. The wires are right there on the backside of the dash, and you connect a couple things together, and generally you can get a car running pretty quickly. I hid a kill switch in the car that will shut off the fuel pump and shut off the ignition coil, so they're not going anywhere. All you have to do to wire that thing in is basically just wire it in between your ignition switch. So down the ignition switch wire, you basically have to put a little switch in there somewhere, and then you put it somewhere under your dash, and then you can click it one way, and everything turns on, and it runs fine. The other way will shut off your fuel pump and your ignition coil. The final switch I had to wire up was the headlight switch. This switch kind of wired up in a cool way. So basically what's going to happen is when it is in the fully down position like this, the power is going to come in through a keyed source here, go out, and then back out of this here, and it will be a keyed source going to the headlights. In the middle, everything will be off. Full top up will be coming in through this yellow wire that is here, and it'll be coming out the same port. And what that does is it runs it out and through and runs a constant to that. So if I'm at a car show and I want to just turn on the halos, have them stay on during a car show or when I'm parked, I can do that. So that's what it's set up for. Yeah, it looks great. So I'm gonna do this switch. I have one more little one I'm gonna do some little wiring on, and then we're gonna start getting in the car and doing some stuff. The first big thing was just me ripping the old radio out. So I ripped the old radio out, and it was like a thin little radio, no Bluetooth, no nothing, just an aux cable and some CDs, I think it took, maybe. And I took that out first and got that put aside and started wiring in the new one. I saw a really good opportunity when I was doing the radio outs now to do the turn signal switch. So I fed it through and wired the thing up and then clicked it on. I tested the horn with a screwdriver. The horn works great. Turn signals click on and off just how I would like them to, which is amazing. So that's finally working. And then once I got the radio finished up, after I got that thing wired up, I turned it on, and lo and behold, I somehow got the wiring right. I had basically 4 sets of speaker wire just sitting back there, and I really didn't know what was what. I know it was coming from the right and the left, but other than that, I didn't know it was front and back. I didn't know any of that. So it was just me trying to figure out how to get everything wired up correctly, and luckily, first time, I got it right. Continuing on with more of the interior, the gauges were next, so that was pretty easy to put on. I basically just used some self-tapper screws and ran them in the brackets up to it. The gauges kind of sit at an angle where they kind of look at you, so I'm able to actually see them from sitting in the cabin, because when you're sitting in this car, you sit kind of high, and everything's kind of down below here. It's so low that you really don't see it, and they're kind of pushed up enough where you kind of end up seeing the gauges. The last big wiring thing I had to do was the headlights. I bought new headlights. I really, really wanted halo headlights. It's not really a need. The headlights worked fine. I just wanted halos really bad. And so I decided to find a set of Oracle headlights online with it's a nice looking crystal design. It's not like the Jeep style ones that are just overly complicated and have tons of lenses and all this stuff on them. I didn't want any of that. I just wanted the most simple headlights. They look classic, they look elegant, and they weren't too hard to wire up. It uses traditional bulbs, so the actual headlight part of it, that just wired in just like it did before. That's no problem whatsoever. The halos each had wires coming off of them for ground and for power. And like I said, with the switch I created, I wanted to make sure that it could run both ways. So once I got the switch mounted, I just drilled a hole through the dash and mounted the switch. And then once the switch was mounted, I basically ran a wire all the way to the front, and I used that as my power wire. That wire could either transmit the constant power I had running or the heat power source that I had running through the switch, and it would all run out as one wire instead of me having to run out 2 to the actual headlights themselves. When I tried actually mounting the headlights for the first time, I ran into a bit of a snafu.
I'm gonna make this bigger, because it doesn't fit. It needs to be a decent bit bigger too. Basically, it needs to be this big. I'll have to cut that to be much bigger. Today, we're going to be finishing these headlight surrounds. The actual headlights themselves, the new ones, don't fit through this hole. So we have to cut this hole back a little bit so it's a little bit wider so that the backs of the headlights fit through there. Each one down and took jigsaw and went around it, made each one bigger so that now it all just sat in there perfectly and had a really good seat, and nothing was hitting and nothing was causing issues anymore. The first time I tested them, I was really happy they worked because I kind of just wired everything. Everything I was wiring in this car, I kind of just did it and didn't really test as I was going. I was kind of just doing it. And once it was working and I saw it and it was all working at the first time, I was just so happy because it's people don't. Why would you add a 3-position switch for your halo lights? No one does that because it's too complicated and it's just dumb. But I did it because I don't know. I'm bored. I don't know how to tell you. As I was getting done with everything wired, I decided to take off the dash because I wanted to kind of make sure things were sitting nicely inside from under the dash, and I wanted to make sure nothing was hanging down because, like I said, it's really common in classic cars just see wires everywhere. With the dash out of the car and everything already, I decided it was time to restore it. I couldn't really figure out a good way of doing it. I tried to order a new dash, but a new dash was going to cost me $1,500 to $2,000, and I wasn't in for that. So I took apart the one I had, and I took all the centering rings out of the gauge cluster, and I started to just sand down everything that was inside of it. I used a wire brush,
and I used the same stuff I used on the bed of the Ranchero to take off the rust. So it was all just surface rust on there. So I just sprayed off the whole inside of it just to take all the rust that was there and make sure it didn't spread any further than that. Any spots that were really, really bad, I just grinded down to a point. And then on the top of the dash, it was like really wavy because I'd been sitting in the sun a lot. And, you know, like I said, I could have bought a whole new dash pad. I could have done all these things, got to get it right. But the easiest way of me doing it was for me to buy a carpet cover for it, which I probably would have had to put on anyway just because of, you know, the sunlight in LA. I would have wanted to retain whatever I ended up doing to the dash. And I just took a little grinding wheel and some sandpaper and a wire brush, and I basically just took down the surface enough that it was flat. And once I had it at that point, I took the cover I had, and between the Velcro it came with and some self-tapping screws, I ran it down in there so that now it looks like a carpeted, nice looking dash, and it's not like all wavy and crappy like it was before. So got this thing all looking good. A little bit of Velcro, a little bit of sticky stuff later. It looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. We're gonna put this back in the car next time I'm here. I don't really have time to do it right now. But yeah, put it back in the car next time. And it's gonna look really cool. I'm excited. And with the dash like finished and like looking good, now it's time to get the seat done, get the dash put back in, get all the mirrors done on the car, and get everything put back together so this car is now a finished car. Because the interior is kind of the last thing I need for this car to drive and be like my car I can go drive every day. So everyone knows, this is the thing that is making that noise. And I could take a BB gun and fix it in 2 seconds. But we're gonna restore a dash.